Okay, Tom, we'd like to hear the traditional longhouse story of the three sisters. If you can tell us that, and
Well, I can try to be somewhat brief about it because it's a long story, actually, but I can generalize about it. Basically, when you say the three sisters to the Iroquois Mohawk people, that is the chief foods or the leader foods of all the other foods that grow. It's just like the country of the United States. It has a president as its leader. Well, of all the foods that grows in the gardens, the corn, beans, and squash is considered the president, or considered the leader, the head of that whole kind of country or garden or whatever. And so that's why it's very important. In the beginning, it begins at the very beginning of the world, when the human beings were created here. And so just the creation story by itself takes about 2.5 to 3 hours to recite it. And that's where the three sister foods have their beginning. And basically what it was is that there was another solar system or another Earth in the solar system somewhere. And that's where our ancestors came from. And they mixed the power of the other Earth and this Earth here together. And that's where the present human beings, which we are, came from. But our original grandmother came from another planet, another Earth in the sky, according to the tradition and stories. And when she arrived here on this Earth, that was only surrounded by water, she then summons the animals, and the animals helped her, and they retrieved the dirt and put it on the turtle's back. And that's why the Indian people call Earth Turtle Island. And that's what the fertile earth became from a turtle's back. And after she was here, she gave birth to a daughter, because she was pregnant when she fell from that other planet. And this daughter grew up into a young woman, and she was impregnated by a spiritual kind of a force, and she gave birth to two set of twins. One was a negative power and one was a positive power, which we call the Halmhiawago is the positive power, and Sawiskala, which will be the negative power. And when she gave birth, one was born in the natural way, and the other one was born from her side, and therefore caused her death. And so the young mother was placed on the ground, and the grandmother began to pile dirt upon her body in a mound. And where her body was in the mound, grew from her heart, where her heart was, grew the corn and the beans and the squash or other vine things like squash, pumpkins, and things like that. And it was told at that time, and this was before the creation of the human beings, that this corn, beans, and squash would be the head of all foods, and the other one would be their cousins and lesser family members. And so it grew from there, because these two boys had the intentions of, according to the Creator's instruction, creating human beings from which we came, you and I. And that when these human beings were created, it will be these three sister foods that will be the main source of their nourishment, and that would help them to continue to live, and generation after generation then would be born. And so it is on 1889 that we are still here, because we still are using those foods, and they are still the leaders of all the foods that grows in the garden. And that's what I know about the three sisters.
that's wonderful. It's a wonderful story, a wonderful telling of the story too. Would you have the time to tell us about a little bit briefly about the preparation of the corn as it's done traditionally, Tom?
Well, there's all kinds of ways to prepare corn. There's many kinds of ways. When the corn is green and juicy. We call it the green corn ceremony or green corn dance. And this corn will be cut in the middle of the rows. The kernels will be cut in half on every row, and then it will be sliced with a knife off the cob, and then it will be put into a frying pan over an open fire, and it will be like a crisp, made into crisp, like a darkish, almost like a burnt, but not quite. And then once you do that, then you mix it with water, and you can mix it with deer meat or pork, salt pork in small pieces, and put it together, and that makes a wonderful soup. And that's the kind of food that is used at the green corn ceremony, and it has to be prepared in that manner in order for it to sanction that green corn ceremony. That's one way. Now, the corn soup that every Mohawk likes and talks about is a different soup. It's from the same corn, or there's another cousin corn to it called a blue corn or flint corn that can be used. Usually that's used for kids' ceremony, but it can be used just like the white soup corn. And that one there, you leave everything in the garden until frost comes, and then after that you begin to separate the corn, take it off the plant, and then you husk those. And those corn cobs that are very beautiful and have very big kernels on it, you save the very best and most beautiful ones, and you braid those up, and it can stand up sometimes 6 foot tall if you braid it right. And that's the one that's going to be saved for seeds, so that always you perpetuate your seeds so that a finer crop will come. And that's why they select these to be braided. And then the other corn that you have taken all the husk off, you put that in a corn crib where there's a breeze, and so keep it out of the rain or the wet. And when that gets hard, really hard, each kernels, then you have to take the kernels off there, and then you separate those two, the ones that are good corn, and the ones that aren't good, you separate those. You can give that to the cows or to the horses or to the birds, but you keep the ones that are real nice. And so you put those away in 100-pound bags usually, and store them in a dry place. Then when you're ready to fix that corn, you have to use the hardwood ashes, and the best one is probably the maple tree, the hard maple tree ashes, and you use that as a lye. There's a chemical in, I guess it's called lye. It must be, I'm not sure, but that's what we use. And you boil a whole bunch of water up in a 5-gallon pot, usually with enamel on it. It's not good to use like a cast iron, because the iron taste goes into it. So they prefer to use older times they used clay pot, but in these times now we will use enamel covered, like for canning pot. And you boil water in there, and then you take the hardwood ashes, and you can put it in the water and let it boil, or you can get a white cloth and you can make like a tea bag out of it, but you put several quarts of ashes in there and tie it up and put it in that boiling water. And you boil that for a while, maybe 20 minutes to half an hour. Then you throw your corn in there. And when you throw your corn in there, your corn will turn real bright orange. And for maybe 20 minutes to half an hour, you leave it in that boiling water. And that hardwood ashes, it peels all the shell off each individual kernel. And then after about maybe 40 minutes or so, depends on the corn, what corn you have, so you can't put a time on. You got to watch the corn, and you see the different stages, and you know when to take it out and rinse it. But usually it's, say, half an hour to 40 minutes, maybe even to an hour, the first boiling. And then we have a special basket that we use that has a special weave to it. It's called a corn washing basket. And then we have a cold water, another pot of cold water, and we take that boiled corn out of there that's all orange, and we strain it through this corn washing basket, and you use a lot of water, and you rinse that up and down that corn basket with the corn in there. And then when you finish all that, you use your hands and you rub them in between your hands to help the shells come off. Then you put it back in a hot water again and boil it again, maybe another 40 minutes or so. And then you rinse it again in the corn washing basket again into the cold water, and you scrub it again. And by this time all this shell, transparent shell, comes off. It keeps coming off. And those that don't, you help it by putting it in your hands and pushing it and rubbing your hands in the palm of your hands until those, then you do it a third time, a third rinsing. And then usually you only have to do 3 rinses, and that corn puffs up like popcorn, and you have washed your corn now. Now if you want to, so at this point you can make cornbread, but you have to dry that corn that you washed, dry it so it's completely dry, and then you grind it, and you can make bread, I don't know what you call it. They're about as big as your hands put together in a round circle.
A loaf? Like a loaf
It don't look like a loaf. It's like M&M's candy,
Okay.
except that it's big as your fingers can make a circle with your 2 hands. And it's about 2 inches thick, and it's mixed with kidney beans. And you have to boil that. Once you pat it together and you boil it in water, but not boil water. The water just not bubbling. And you put it in there until those things come to the top, or so long, and it'll be cooked. And that's the real Indian cornbread, Mohawk cornbread. And we also make our wedding cakes out of that same process, except that instead of putting kidney beans in there, we put strawberries in there, and that's for a wedding. That's the main, what we call wedding cake or wedding bread for a wedding, see. Now, that same corn, if you're not going to make bread with it, you will you just put it into the big pot again, and you put kidney beans in there, and you put in pork hocks or spare ribs or deer's meat or beaver meat, and cut it up and put it in there and cook it together, little salt and little pepper, and that's the real corn soup. But then in the Mohawk country, they have a different kind of corn soup too. They will mix carrots in there, and sometimes turnips and different vegetables in there, huh? But the real corn soup doesn't have all that stuff in it. It just has the kidney bean and the corn and meat in there, and pepper and salt a little bit, and that's the real one. But today, lots of Mohawks mix with all vegetables in there, and that's kind of a contemporary traditional way of making it. And you can roast that corn, and there's all kind of ways that you can do to make with corn. You can do many things with it. And the beans is also used in there. And the beans is, you make baked beans and all kinds of beans, you know.
And the squash?
And the squash, you make puddings, all kinds of puddings and pies, and you dry it up and put it away. And all those 3 sisters, you can dry them up. You don't need a Frigidaire or anything. You can dry them up in a natural environment, and they'll preserve for you. That's why the Creator gave it to us, so that we don't have to. It can be a natural way to live.
That's wonderful. That's a great explanation. That's exactly what we were looking for. Is that all right, Beverly? Okay, great. Your shirt is wonderful. That's just